I remember my Spanish professor once said, he's he had a big head, but he's short, and he told us he looked like a mushroom.
Yeah. We're going to start. We're going to start in just a few seconds. Go ahead.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We will now begin the keynote speech section. I will now hand it off to our first keynote speech moderator, Solazar. Take it away, Solazar. You're on mute, Solazar.
It's the best way to listen to me is on mute. So welcome, fellow Toastmasters and guests, and I want to thank you for joining us for this very special event. As many of you have been putting in the chat, and as you've heard in the dialogue, this is one you don't want to miss. Now, not only will we have the benefit of being enthralled and intoxicated by the wisdom of Miss Patricia Fripp, but two Toastmasters are going to have the benefit of her assessing their presentations. Now, they've provided their presentations to her in advance, but she's only going to assess and critique and give guidance on the first 4 or 5 lines of the presentation, because after all, it's the introduction of our presentation that engages and draws in the audience. Now, as we move forward, I ask everyone to remain muted. We encourage everyone to put their video on, however, so Patricia can actually see your faces as she's providing her presentation. And should you find the engaging, entertaining, masterful, passionate presentation of Patricia Fripp does not keep you listening to her wisdom words, or observant of her masterful style, or amazed at the clear construction of her presentation, and you feel an absolute burning need to ask a question, then please send your questions directly to me, Moderator Solazar, in the chat. Keep all other conversations out of the chat. We don't want a bunch of dialogue going on, and Patricia will not be looking at the chat. So I'll be looking for your questions to ask later on when we get to the Q&A session. Short, specific questions that deal with the topic discussed. No curious dog George questions. Don't start asking about the beach blanket Babylon hat. Just ask about the topic being discussed. Don't chat with anyone. Don't engage in side conversations. Clearly, I've been a cheap judge too often. Now the reason you're here. When you first joined Toastmasters, did you dream of one day becoming an in-demand, award-winning keynote speaker? Or to be invited to deliver 3,500 presentations in over 5 continents? Or be acknowledged for designing one of the best presentation skills online learning platforms? It might surprise you to know that when Patricia Fripp left Wimborne, Dorset at age 20 to find fame and fortune in America, neither did she. At age 30, she joined Cable Car Toastmasters. Certainly, she had no idea she would accomplish these milestones. She was the second woman to keynote at a Toastmasters International Convention, as she mentioned earlier. She was the first woman elected to be president of the National Speakers Association. Kiplinger's Personal Finance magazine wrote, "One of the best investments in you is to learn presentation skills from Patricia Fripp." In 2019, she was named one of the top 30 women in sales and one of the top 30 global communication gurus. Her most recent book, Deliver Unforgettable Presentations, is co-authored with 2 world champions, Darren LaCroix and Mark Brown. Now, you have to admit, this is not bad for a young woman who began her career as a hairstylist at age 15 and arrived in America at age 20 with no job, no contacts, and only $500. Strap in. Don't miss a second of how to deliver unforgettable presentations from Hall of Fame speaker, executive speech coach, online learning expert, Patricia Fripp.
Thank you. I accept your applause, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. And it is so good to be back with so many of my longtime Toastmaster friends. What makes an unforgettable presentation? We may all have a different point of view. Based on my experience, if we want our presentations to be on fire, here are 6 of the best suggestions on how you can, no matter how seasoned you are, double or triple the quality of the presentations. Now, this is going to be an action-packed, fast-moving session. 1, we need good content. What are we going to talk about? I suggest you mine the treasure trove of your life experience. When I work with my coaching clients, I ask them to give me a snapshot of their lives. Begin at the beginning. I ask, where were you born? What did your parents do? What advice did they give you that helped you become who you are now? Why not get some of your Toastmaster friends together and take it in turns to go through the timeline of your life? This is what I like to call the once upon a time technique. Now, talk about yourself, though, as if you were somebody else. Once upon a time, a little girl was born in a small town in the south of England. She had one brother who was 1 year, 1 month, 2 days, 12.5 hours younger than she was. He grew up to be an internationally acclaimed rock and roll guitarist and considered by many a genius. Her dad was a self-made entrepreneur, successful in the real estate industry. And the first day she went to work as a hairstyling apprentice, he pushed her out the door and said, in your career, don't concentrate on making a lot of money. Rather, concentrate on becoming the type of person that people want to do business with. And you most likely will make a lot of money. My mother, who was called the Duchess of Wimborne, always dressed up and looked glamorous. And she said, Patricia, of course, it's the inner you that counts. However, you have to dress up and look good so that you can attract people and they can find out how nice you are, how smart you are, and how valuable you can be to them. So I suggest you do this with your friends and look at what were the turning points, the learning lessons, what's the best advice you have, what were the challenges, what were the successes. And as you go through this as a time frame, and it's easier to do this when you're talking about yourself as if you were another character, your friends will tell you what they want to hear more about. Now, your content, of course, can be what you do for a living. And I have enjoyed success in 2 different careers, as a hairstylist and as a speaker, and I loved both. What we can do to find content, whether it's formal presentations or stories for our Toastmaster clubs, talk about what you know that others want to hear about. Now, of course, when you're a professional speaker, you have to talk about what a subject is that they will pay to hear. Now, at the beginning of my speaking career, I was still a hairstylist. And if you look at the image to the left, that's very much what I looked like when I first joined Toastmasters. And I thought, well, I like to speak, but I'm not an expert on anything. And then I realized I really am. I'm an expert at getting, keeping, and deserving customers and clients, because that's what I did in my hairstyling salon. And often people come to me and say, I want to be a professional speaker. And I say, well, what have you done well at? Nothing. Well, whatever has made you a success at what you are doing now is going to make you a success in any other endeavor you want. So, for example, one of my first speeches was everything I learned about business, I learned from behind a hairstyling chair. And I loved and learned from my clients. And this is one of my earlier stories. And yes, Henry Miller, I opened your conference with this story. I'll never forget the first time I met Larry Mariottini.
What time?
It was,
I sent you South African. It's 7:30.
all right, can we mute
Oh,
everybody,
it's already
please?
7.
Please
All
unmute
right, so
Patricia.
now
There we go.
I have unmuted me. Okay, let's go back. I'll never forget the first time I met Larry Mariottini. It was 10:45 on a Tuesday in 1972. I walked into the lobby of this very shishi men's hairstyling salon where I worked, and there he sat, looking most uncomfortable. Someone had said to him, "You need Miss Fripp." Well, he didn't know if he needed Miss Fripp, but he was there. Larry Mariottini was a computer programmer for Levi Strauss. I guess you might say Larry was a nerd long before I knew what one was or dreamed I would want to grow up and be one. I took him back to my booth and I shampooed, conditioned, cut, styled, sprayed and fluffed his hair. He looked good. He didn't know he looked good, but he looked good. He walked out of my salon with a bag of shampoo, conditioner, hairstyle, hairspray, never spent so much money in a barber shop in his entire life. And he went back to work at Levi Strauss. As he walked in, all the women said, "Larry." He went home that evening and his wife said, "Larry." Well, you can imagine after a couple of days of this positive response, he realized he did look good. And as what usually happens in our lives, if we improve one aspect of our appearance or our daily habits or our presentations, it has a tendency to spread. Larry became a regular client and he joined a gym, trimmed down, buffed up, bought some trendier new clothes and started acting in a more outgoing way. So much so that Levi Strauss offered him a sales position even though he had no prior sales experience. They cut Larry Mariottini's territory 5 times and he still kept selling more than everyone else. He told me, "Out of my little office, I sell more inventory than some stores do." Now, I know what you're probably thinking. This Fripp woman wants to take full credit for transforming this man's life, getting him a better paid job and, shall we say, more attention at home. Well, obviously, Larry Mariottini had something to do with that. However, consider this. Every day when I went to work as a hairstylist, I could have looked at my job one of 2 ways. I have 16 heads of hair to cut, or I have the opportunity to positively impact other people's lives. And when you do your job from the point of view, I am in service to others, we are more likely to develop clients and customers for decades. So that was one of the stories I used to tell in those early days, and I bring back every so often, I bring back Larry, because what I want you to consider, and you may have heard this story before, however, let's look at the formula and how you can put that in your presentations to make them unforgettable. When you have to let the audience know, when was this? Where was it? And that's just background. Who is in the story and what happens? Now, when you have a character, you need to give them the backstory. So Larry's was a computer programmer for Levi Strauss. Now, if I call him a nerd, let's say perhaps you call him a nerd, but you can't insult him, especially when I know my audience is full of engineers. However, you don't insult your characters because they're important. long before I knew what one was or dreamed I would want to grow up and be one. And then, although that doesn't have a lot of dialogue, Larry, you need Miss Fripp deliver the dialogue if it were in a script in quotation marks. So Larry comes back every so often. Not only do I have great affection for the story and Larry, it has very important principles. Now, part of my personal discipline in learning to become a better speaker and speech coach and writer was to take multiple screenwriting classes. And not that I have any talent or patience to be a screenwriter. However, you have to admit, Hollywood knows how to tell a good story. And in every Hollywood movie, there is a formula, or the blockbuster movies that I like to see. And I want you to recognize that this formula that works in your stories and Hollywood movies is in Larry. First of all, a day in the life. You are introduced to the hero of the film or the protagonist. And a hero is not necessarily a heroic person. It is the person you see the movie and the story through their eyes. So one, you need to know your character. Who's the person? And we need to have a slight understanding of what the beginning point is. Then something happens. Now, in the Larry story, he had his hair styled. And the result of that is, and the result of that is, and that's a Hollywood movie. It's a simple little story about somebody having his hair cut. And it will work in your stories. So let's look at it one other way in another movie technique. Michael Haig, who is another screenwriting story consultant who's a good friend of mine, one of his techniques is get into the scene late. So imagine if I was telling a story and the opening line is Mary had a problem. Now you wonder, well, who's Mary? What's her problem? Now you give the backstory. Mary was a seasoned HR professional. For over 20 years, she'd run HR departments in the most prestigious companies in Silicon Valley. Now, what do you now know that I don't have to tell you? You know, based on where Mary's worked and how long she's been successful in the industry, you know Mary eats problems for lunch. Mary is invited to speak to HR conferences to give seminars on how to solve problems. So without me having to tell you, we're only 2 lines in the story, and you know this has got to be a big problem. Next line. Jay walked in and said, Mary, we're about to be sued for $28 million and I think it was my fault. Now that's getting into the scene late. You've got the character, you've got the backstory, and now you know what her problem is. So it's 3 or 4 lines you're into the story. Now, one of the novice mistakes that we make is that you put too much setup. Perhaps you could say, well, when Mary was young, she was always so helpful to her classmates. And as she grew to be a teenager, she took multiple tests to see what profession would be good for her. And a counselor said, Mary, your personality and approach and the way you help other students, you would be great in HR. Do you need that? Get to the action. Any backstory you need beyond that can come out later in the speech. Now, another screenwriting teacher, Robert McKee, one of the most famous screenwriting teachers, said stories are the creative conversion of life itself into a powerful, clearer, more meaningful experience. Because most of us, some of the most famous speakers, The people you love tell simple stories. However, they are well told. Stories have power. And if you're taking notes, write this down. What is personal is universal. The pride I felt in my job improving Larry's life is exactly the same as what you might do in your life. So let's see what Fripp Virtual has to say about stories. How often have you sat in an audience and been mesmerized by a speaker? Was it their compelling content? Were their stories scintillating? Do they have the ability to reach out and grab you in a way you thought, wow, the speaker is talking just to me? Be honest. How many life-changing, career-building, or awe-inspiring presentations have you heard? Have you ever been that speaker? What would it mean to you and your career if you had that ability? I guarantee if you've heard a good speech, sermon, or business presentation that you enjoyed and remembered, at least one reason that made it memorable was the stories. Everybody loves a good story, and that is part of their power. No matter what our culture, we grow up feeling that hearing a story is somehow a reward. Stories are how we learn values and our family's legacy. When we're in school, stories make history come alive. In business, we quickly discover that stories help us explain complex issues and are the best way to connect to coworkers, customers, and audiences of all sizes and makeup. Wise leaders, managers, sales professionals, professional speakers, consultants, trainers, in fact, anybody with ambition who wants to make a difference will do well to develop an arsenal of great stories. These stories will provide clear, dramatic examples. No matter what position or level you find yourself, good stories help differentiate you from your competition. Stories are about people, and we like to hear them speak. So now that you know, we have to have good, killer keynote content. So my best suggestion is, one, you have to have good content that is originally you from your life. That includes perfecting it into good, tight, well-constructed stories. So that was my first best suggestion. My next is you have to have a good speech structure. Now, this helps with your shorter stories. It certainly helps more in your professional presentations when you have to put together longer speeches. So one, on a yellow pad, a flip chart, a whiteboard, if you're giving an important presentation, write out all your key ideas, your stories, the key points you want to get across. And I find it's a lot easier if you can see ideas you're gathering. Now, this works if you're giving a longer business presentation. It certainly works when you do your once upon a time life technique just to gather all the different stories worth developing. And yes, you can keep it in a notebook. I personally like flip charts all over the house for different talks or segments I'm working on. Now, this is the recommended process you go through. First, you are going to gather your content. Then you're going to look at, do you collaborate? If this is a business presentation and you are talking on behalf of your team, obviously bring your team in to give you ideas and feedback. If this is just for a Toastmaster story, bring in your pals and rehearse them before you deliver them at the club. It is very difficult to be creative in isolation. Then, of course, we want to have a simple structure, and I'm going to give you some suggestions of how you can begin doing that. And then if this is a formal presentation, this is what you do before you bring out the PowerPoint. Now, I know if you're giving a presentation you've delivered before, you might look at the presentation you created and the visuals, take out any that are not pertinent and put them aside. Develop the framework before you look at the visuals. And then you ask yourself, where do I really need them? You're going to build chunks of content and some initial scripting. Now, the chunks of content is your talking points that are well delivered. Now, when it comes to opening and setting off, one of my biggest projects for multiple technology companies, I help everybody, all the engineers and the technical experts, get ready for their breakout sessions at the user and customer conferences. And I always suggest that they start with welcome to the name of the session. In case we haven't had the pleasure, I am in my role as a, and I ask them, what is it you do every day that helps your customers who are in the audience? And then if you have a co-presenter, you would say, you will also be hearing from my colleague, build up their credentials. You might say, we have a combined 40 years of technical experience. So of course you're going to look at stories, case histories, or your product demo that may be complex. You're going to put that in and tell it as a story or step by step. You, of course, you're going to review your key ideas. You're going to challenge the audience to take action. You want Q&A, and then you're going to close. And then a very important part is to rehearse. I know a lot of my corporate clients think once they got their presentation, their slides, they're done. And I tell them, no, you're halfway done. Now you've got to get it in your body. So now why don't you grab a piece of paper and a pen, and what I want you to do is write down the page. Every, can, the subject of your talk, how, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the foundation of your premise formula. Now, probably you are going to deliver the same type of content to different groups. And I suggest you go through this premise formula for each group. So for example, every Toastmaster in District 101 can deliver unforgettable presentations. Now, if I made this statement, because sometimes a premise is statement, sometimes it's just assumed based on what you're doing, you would think, oh, that's what I want. That's why I signed up. The how is the 1, 2, 3, 4, which is the structure. That's the skeleton. That's the talking points that you are going to fill in. So you have your structure, which is built on a premise. Now, for every formal presentation that we prepare, we probably have dozens of opportunities to speak up with no planning, and Table Topics prepares you for this. So imagine you are at a division company meeting and your boss says you have 10 minutes, we have 10 minutes. Why don't you give us an update on your latest project? So you have no time to either understand that everyone in the Zoom is going to be looking at you, or you have maybe 4 rows to walk up to the front of the room. And this is what I mean by being perpetually prepared and having a framework, a structure that comes to mind. When you are standing up and you have no notice, you have to have something to say while you're thinking about what you're going to say. And I would suggest that opening line is, thank you for the opportunity to update you on our latest project. Then, as part of your formula that's in your back pocket, which means it is prepared for when you need it, put this presentation in the context. You might say you will remember in January our leadership challenges too. In April, you heard that this had happened. In July. Now that we're in October, nearly at year end, our biggest challenge has been, we were most proud of, you will be excited to know. So you see, these are in the back of your mind, you just fill in the slots. And anytime you have an audience and the bosses are there, have an ask. We need your help with supporting this project, promoting this initiative, or we need more budget. Next year, we could do with more budget because as you can see, we really need one other professional. And then when you close, again, thank you for the opportunity. Now bring in your team, and you can be confident that the dedicated 6-person marketing team is 100% committed to the success of this project. So that is how you have a speech structure for when you're perpetually prepared. However, it looks like you're not prepared, and that's when you get the reputation. Wow, you should have seen her. She didn't know she's going to be on the program, and she walked up and she was so prepared. It was amazing. So that was my second best suggestion. You need good content and you need a good, strong and simple structure based on a central theme, a premise. Now we have to look at your delivery. And you know, so many of our meetings are still virtual and they will always be virtual. Even now we're getting back in person. And my best advice is project energetic intimacy. And what I make sure all my engineers know, especially if these are pre-recorded, even if they have an audience in front of them, you have to be yourself. However, you have to be yourself on purpose. You notch it up just a little and you build intimacy by having a conversation with one person. So if it's pre-recorded or virtual, don't say, glad you're all here, because you're only talking to one person at home. And the secret of having a good presentation is to sound conversational. And then, of course, and I know not every company does this, but turn on your webcam and smile. Now, when you are in person, and we all know, as Michael Caine said, rehearsal is the work, performance is the relaxation. And if this is an in-person presentation, once you've got your preparation, you're getting it in your body. However, I recommend you do that, and whenever possible, go to the room where you're going to speak if you're speaking at a conference. If not, stand up. Knowing your presentation sitting down is not the same as delivering it standing up. And make sure when you stand, you have firm feet, no hip out, weight on one foot. And if you're going to move, move on purpose. In other words, this is not nervous footwork. You are moving on purpose. When you come to your key ideas, stand still. It's as if you are verbally underlining that part of the presentation. Now, watch your gestures that they do not always mirror each other. If you look at the video clips we've put in, you will notice my hands aren't always doing the same. I watched an MC at a 4-day conference and it drove me crazy because both her gestures were always like this for 4 days. It was most irritating. Remember, everything we do adds to or distracts from our message. So now you realize you need good content, a simple structure, that you add some scripting, and then a few ideas of virtual and in-person delivery. Now, if you are a long-time Toastmaster, you may subscribe to the adage, practice makes perfect. In other words, the more you speak, the better you are. Now, somebody else is competing for my attention. So I don't know who's, okay, good. So you might subscribe to the adage that practice makes perfect. In other words, the better you are if you speak a lot. That isn't necessarily true. And I hate to shatter that illusion, but practice does not make perfect. What practice does is make permanent. What you do superbly well is reinforced. However, all your bad habits or areas to improve are also reinforced. So now that you have 3 of the best suggestions on how you fire up your presentation and become unforgettable. So 1, the 3rd is delivery. So you have content, structure, delivery, and the 4th, most important, well, they're all important, but do not overlook, and that is to connect to your audience, engage them, bring them into the presentation. And one of the most important words to engage your audience is you, and use you-focused language. So let's see what Fripp Virtual says about this. An important part of being an effective speaker is not magic. It's technique, knowledge, skill, and preparation. This course will provide you techniques for making sure your audience connects with you as a presenter and with your message, the way you meant it. The most important part of this course is to remember it's all about the audience. Yes, I know. You want to be remembered as an intelligent and dynamic presenter. However, if an audience of any size feels you're concerned and interested in them, they will remember you positively. What I'm going to recommend you do is to make a list of you-focused phrases that you can use to bring the audience into your presentation. So, for example, you can feel confident. Now, if you're making a recommendation to your leadership or your manager, that's a good phrase. How often of you? Now, anytime an audience hears something like, how often of you? It's, oh, what? Perhaps you agree. In your experience. Now, I have several pages of you-focused language that I can use that are part of my repertoire, and I recommend that you use these as a beginning, but come up with your own. And as you're going through presentations, always ask yourself, 1, is this good original content? 2, is it logical, the way I'm presenting it? When, where, who, what happened? Do I have a simple logical structure, even if it's only a 5-minute speech? Do I find ways to bring in my audience, and am I rehearsing it so I deliver it well? So my 4th best suggestion, of course, you have to connect to the audience. So we have structure, content, delivery, and of course, connecting to your audience. We use words to communicate. Words are our currency. So we have to use better words if we want better results. And as you will find later with the mini coaching, you can paint scenes with your words. So I am famous, and if you've heard me speak before, I guarantee probably this was in that presentation. I am well known for a phrase, specificity builds credibility. Credibility builds confidence for you and those you talk to. And I hate to say it, but we are turning into a world of sloppy speakers. Now, part of this is the way we communicate so often in text, and it doesn't have to be complete sentences. And we are out of the habit of talking to people. We've been working at home so much, so there might be some reasons, all the more reasons to get involved in Toastmasters and practice as much as possible. Now, you are about to hear, or you've probably seen before, some of my naughty no words, and I make my executives slap their hands. Now, if it's a Zoom, I slap my hand as well, so it hurts me to help them improve. But here are the no words. And you may think you don't use them or you don't overuse them. I bet you probably do. So my recommendation is, 1, record your presentations and listen to them. And then if you find words that need to be improved, give your friends and family members permission to give you feedback. People aren't going to criticize you if they live with you or work closely with you if you don't give them permission. So you might say, I'm trying to use more specific language. If you hear me say this, or this, bring my attention to it. So for example, the first one is stuff, rubbish and debris. I was at a conference and this company had just spent $4 million in a new offering. And the international sales manager was on stage and he was handsome and eloquent and speaking without notes. And I thought, this is one of the best executive speakers I've ever heard. And then he said, our customers need our stuff. And he's talking about an investment of millions of dollars. No, they need our solutions. Now, the next one, and this is my most frequently asked question of all my clients. If it weren't a thing, what would it be? For example, one of my brilliant engineers, as part of his presentation, he said there are 2 things people love about. I said, if they weren't things, what would they be? He said, innovative upgrades. I said, there are billions of people in the world. What people love your innovative upgrades? He said, systems administrators. Can you see the difference in the quality of the communication between there are 2 things people love about and there are 2 innovative upgrades that systems administrators love? That's specific. And as many of you are engineers, you realize at these user conferences, because I also go to them and coach them on site, they had customers from 71 different countries, many who don't speak English, and they're listening to a simultaneous translation. So as brilliant as these people are, they don't know what you mean by thing. So please be clear and concise. Slow down. Think about what comes next. So the next one is, if it's not fruits or vegetable, it's not a bunch. Now, don't you ever dare tell me, oh, I went to one of your speeches and I got a bunch of ideas. No, you didn't. You got 2 pages of notes and 3 actionable techniques you're going to use. Be specific. Same idea. If you can't wait, it's not tons. You don't get tons of ideas. You don't go to a Toastmaster club and meet tons of interesting people unless you're putting them all on the scale. You know, one of my other clients in Silicon Valley, I was explaining to her, Michelle, when it comes to delivering information, it's unlimited how many people can listen. We're only limited to the fact I can only coach 10 people in the day. However, anybody can watch if they're going to learn these presentations in the future. She said, Patricia, that is a great idea because Greg just hired a boatload of people. I said, Michelle, was it a dinghy or an ocean liner? How do I know what a boatload of people is unless I know what size the boat is? And then I said, Michelle, how many people did he hire? She said 4. Now, what's wrong with saying 4? Why do you have to give me a boatload? So we are talking about words to use and words to lose. You know, you is a magic word, but here are some more words that I hear a lot from all of my clients that I'm going to recommend you remove. First of all, actually and literally, you don't need those words. You can take them out. And the words you take out that are not needed, the words that are left, are more memorable. Another, and this a lot in Silicon Valley, what you are doing as brilliant engineers and technical experts or in any other field, what you are doing is simplifying the complexity for your customers and colleagues to understand. What I say I do, I simplify and demystify what it takes to deliver a powerful, persuasive presentation. Now, what I find many of my engineers do, because they are trying to make what they're saying understandable, they say, well, basically it's this, or simply it's this. I said, no, no, no. You are simplifying the complexity, but don't ever call your technology simple or basic. Otherwise, you wouldn't be charging this much. Or they'll say, well, if it's basic, why are we paying this much? There is power in the words you use. Choose them well. Then another, and I find this happens with everyone, even presidents of companies, well, kind of, a sort of. No, and I always say, you don't kind of or sort of anything. You do it or you don't do it. No wishy-washy language. How are you going to build confidence in audiences if you're going to say, well, I kind of do this? No, you don't. And this is one of my pet peeves. It's almost as if people have forgotten every single adjective in the entire world except super. I was at a technical conference for 4 days, and all the middle-aged executives on stage for 4 days, understanding, as they said to me, our salespeople are in their 20s and early 30s. Our job is their first or second job. And for 4 days, everything was super this. It's a super conference. Our new offerings are super. Your results are super. And I thought, here are middle-aged executives trying to look young and hip for the young sales professionals. And what they should be doing is modeling. If you want to do well in business and become an executive, this is how you have to speak. And apart from that, I have no opinion on the subject. Okay, so let's see. So my fifth best suggestion, of course, was be aware of the words you use and the words you lose. Now, of course, we have to open our presentation with impact. Now, of course, the opening of your presentation is part of your speech structure.
Gloria, are you watching it?
All right, where is my competition coming from? All right, let's see. So, of course, the opening of your presentation is part of your speech structure, how it's such an important part that it deserves to be in its own category. And in the book, Darren, Mark, and I have a chapter on structure, a chapter on stories, and a chapter on openings, because this is Very, very important. So let's see what Fripp Virtual says about this. Now remember, while you listen, watch the hands. Welcome to You Have Choices, Options of Openings, the Techniques. As you soon will come to discover, our subtitle is How to Open Your Presentation with Impact. At the beginning of a speech, presentation, seminar, client meeting, report to senior management, sales presentation, or any manner of presentation you deliver, you need to arouse interest in the subject. After all, we stand in the rain to see a movie. Would you stand in the rain to listen to your presentation? Well, I don't know if anyone would stand in the rain to hear my opening or your presentation. However, isn't it nice to think that they would? What we know is the purpose of the opening of your presentation is to arouse interest in your subject. Certain speech openings captivate, mystify, and create an emotional bond that keeps an audience in the palm of a speaker's hand. There are great ways to instantly bond with your audience. We don't ever want to look out and see them dozing off or wandering out of the room, or perhaps turning off their webcam and focusing elsewhere. Now, before we get to some surefire ways to begin your presentation, let's discuss what you do not want to say. Don't be boring. Being predictable is boring. Don't say, "Good morning, my name is John Smith and I'm going to talk about." That's boring. I also tell my clients, and I have written quite a few acceptance speeches, which I collaborate with my client. What do they want to say? And I to show them how to say it better. But they come out, they want to thank people for the award. Well, that's appropriate. But I say, don't be polite up front. Grab their attention. I wrote one 2 weeks ago for a brilliant young man who was getting the first award on innovation from his college. And his opening line was, "I was destined to be an entrepreneur." And after the opening, then I got him to do his thanks. So you don't want to be boring, and being predictable is boring. Now, one of the first scientists I ever worked with worked at Genentech. He was my next door neighbor, Mike Powell, and he was working as a senior scientist at Genentech. This was in the 90s, and he was working on the AIDS vaccine. And I said, "Mike, I want you to come to my professional women's organization and talk about the work you're doing developing the AIDS vaccine." You know, at the time, everybody was nervous. Everyone wanted to know. And I said, "But understand, we don't spend time with scientists. And even if we did, we probably wouldn't know what they were talking about." So I said, "I want you to let us know in your opening statements, what is it like being a scientist?" And this is what he said. "Being a scientist is like doing a jigsaw puzzle in a snowstorm at night when you don't have all the pieces and you don't have the picture you're trying to create. I would defy you to come up with a better way than that to describe what you do. And as a creative exercise, I encourage you, as a subject at one of your Toastmaster meetings, is all come up based on what you do, using the opening line, being a is like. And I promise you that will be a great opening at a lot of conferences. Now we're moving right along here. Now we are going to look at some of the classic ways you can open your presentations. And then we will have our brave mini coaching speakers. A great way to open, I believe it is overused in Toastmasters. I got to be honest. I was coaching somebody and they didn't even realize there was another way to open a presentation than a question. So a question is good, but I suggest you to look at a few more interesting ways to use it. So for example, you could use a rhetorical question. It could be something like, if I were to ask you, is 2022 the year you double or quadruple the quality of your presentations? Perhaps you'll say yes. Perhaps you'd say no. Most likely you would say, Patricia, I would love it to be, can you tell me how? Well, welcome to How to Deliver Unforgettable Presentations. So you can see, make it rhetorical. So the answer is yes, no, and most likely it would be, how do I do that? Now, this is a way you can put your name in, because people might love our speeches, they forget who we are. So find ways to put your name in it. And I bet probably you have asked a question opening such as, have you ever stood up to speak and forgotten what you're going to say? Have you ever walked into a room of strangers you wanted to meet and didn't know how to begin a conversation? So most likely the audience would think, yeah, I did, and I lived through it. Next time you use that type of question, have you ever, I want you to change it to, how often have you stood up to deliver a presentation and forgotten how to open? The assumption is then that it's happened more than once, therefore it will happen again, and your message becomes more important and urgent. So that's the one word advantage. That's a word to use. How often have you? All right. A second wonderful way is, and one of my personal favorites, an interesting statistic or little known fact. Now, no doubt in your presentations, you have, especially if you're engineers or you're experts in any field giving a presentation about that, you have some interesting statistics or little known facts. What I'm recommending you do is pull one or two of them up to the front of the presentation, and then you add an emotion. Would it interest you to know? And again, that's the U word. You're going to pull people in. Oh, what? Would it surprise you to know? Would it amaze you to know? For example, it might interest you to know that according to the Wall Street Journal, executives who can speak without notes make 72% higher income than those who can't. Just so take a statistic, add an emotion, and then you can say, welcome to whatever your subject is. Now, I used an interesting statistic or little known fact that was pertinent to an audience that would be wondering, what on earth could this person be telling us about the subject? This was when I addressed 350 Seventh-day Adventist pastors. And the subject on the program was how to design and deliver a more charismatic sermon. Now, we have to expect, if we're speaking at a conference, people are going to read the write-up and think, she's the only person on the program who isn't a minister. How can somebody who isn't a minister tell me how to write a better sermon? I write one every week. I bet she isn't even a Seventh-day Adventist, which I'm not. So can you understand, knowing that people are polite enough to think somebody thinks she deserves to be on the program? But if you can start with an interesting statistic or little known fact from their world, not yours, you might grab their attention and their respect. So I walked on stage and said, 465 times in the Bible, it says it came to pass. It does not say it came to stay. And unless your sermon is artfully crafted, unless your sermon is well constructed, artfully crafted, and charismatically delivered, it will not come to stay in the hearts, minds, and lives of your congregation. And if you've never heard 350 Seventh-day Adventist pastors say amen and hallelujah after your opening line, you have not lived. That's a great way to get off to a good beginning. Now, another is transport your audience. So think of it this way: you are time traveling. And there are two ways to time travel: to the past or into the future. Now, if you time travel to the past, you might use an opening line too. I wish you could have been there. It was one of the most exciting moments of my life. I wish I could introduce you to my dad. Or the year was 1972. Or it was the first 6 months after World War II. Or as we reflect on last year's goals, now that's taking people into the past. If you take them into the future, it would be imagine. Now what you could do, this is October the 29th, 2022. You could say imagine it is October the 29th, 2023. You're just getting ready to deliver a presentation. And you take a moment to reflect that this is the most expensive suit you've ever owned. And somehow for the past year, you've been more in demand to speak. You got accommodations from your manager. Now you paint a picture into the future and then you say, will that be a reality? It all depends on the decisions you make on October the 29th, 2022. When you hear a presentation on how to deliver unforgettable presentations, and you hear an overview of 6 techniques you can incorporate. Okay, so you get the idea. Now then, of course, we've talked about stories, and we won't talk more about stories as we've discussed it, but that is a great way on how you can open a presentation. Now remember, your opening story has to tie into your premise. So that was my 6th best suggestion. So you have your content, you have your structure, you deliver it well. You connect to your audience, you're going to use better and more specific words, and you're going to open with impact. So now we are coming to a fun segment, which is 2 people who are going to have equal billing with me. They're going to be spotlighted, and they are going to deliver the opening of their presentations, which they sent in, and then I will give you my version of how we can incorporate some of the techniques we've talked about into their presentations. So we have Kunal and Ankit. I don't know if did I pronounce that correctly? Okay, Kunal, look at that smile. Who can? Now tell me, am I saying your name correctly? Kunal?
Yes, you are.
All right, good. And Claire Boo Crew. Okay, that's Ankit?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, good. So let's do, and what I'm going to do, whoever isn't speaking, like Ankit, if you just bring up your photograph, and then just so we can put total attention on who is speaking each time. So Kanal, I want you to go do your presentation down to the place where I couldn't connect with his obsession. That's your last line. So what we're going to do, I'm going to say, here's Kanal. What's not perfect is still perfect, Kanal. And then I'm going to do a little yay, and then you'll begin. All right?
Sure.
We're about to hear from my co-presenter, Kanal. What's not perfect is still perfect, Kanal.
Life is imperfect, yet we plan to make things perfect. I want a perfect job, or want to drive a perfect car, or go on a perfect date. Friends, have you ever wished something in life to be perfect? Well, I have no clue which part of my life I wanted perfect. But my school friend Sahil knew exactly what he wanted. He wanted a perfect wedding. One day after school, I called him to check on school homework. Sahil, do we really have to do that speech writing project? What? Gold invitation card? Royal Palace as venue? Who's getting married? You are getting married? But we are 10. We were 10. And for 2 decades, Sahil planned every little detail to make his wedding day memorable. I couldn't connect with his obsession.
All right, good. So you understand that's good. That's very good. And I took a slightly different tack because this is funny. I mean, I've never heard of maybe a little girl, but not a boy. And so this is the approach that I took. Again, not right or wrong, but let's look at what and see the difference. I don't know about you. My philosophy is to look at the world as if it were perfect. Don't we all want a perfect job? To drive the perfect car? Or to go on a perfect date? Growing up, I didn't have a clue what perfect was, or what segments of my life I wanted to be perfect. However, my school friend Sahil knew exactly what he wanted, a perfect wedding. I called him on an unrelated matter and he said, my vision is now perfect. 500 guests will receive gold invitation cards. The venue will be in the Royal Palace. The food will be prepared by 3 celebrity chefs. The wedding clothes will be designed by Yves Saint Laurent. And the honeymoon will be a 3-month around the world cruise. Naturally, I asked, who's getting married? I am. But we're only 10. Now, my point is, yes, he's your old school friend, but I think it would be much more fun if you let the audience think this is when you grew up. And I'm also including the audience because we all want the perfect job. We all want to drive the perfect car and we all want to go on the perfect date. So then also what I did, I added more specifics. 500 guests. Because you had in your script, you had 2 details about the invitation cards, and then one other. So and you had the venue, isn't that right? The cards and the venue. Well, I want the food, 3 celebrity chefs, because celebrity chefs are celebrities these days. And then Yves Saint Laurent. It could be anyone. It could be Armani, whatever would be your favorite. And the honeymoon, 3 months around the world cruise. So that's what I did. So, and a good speech is always, it's a work in progress. So you've got a good idea. So add more details, make it universal, and add the surprise. You know, because it's so much funnier now if we think you're grown up and he suddenly calls and for Toastmasters you might say about a speech, but I just didn't want to distract with anything except the wedding. So I said I called on another matter. Theatrical choice is not right or wrong. But anyway, thank you for playing along. So with that, I'll give you a little applause.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So now we will have Ankit. Did I say that correctly? Good.
That is correct.
All right. And now what was the name? Oh, rock, paper, water. All right, good. So do the little intro, the yay, then you'll deliver. Okay. Ankit will deliver rock, paper, water. Ankit.
Imagine this. It's a wonderful morning after a day of rain. You finally decided to start running. You're all dressed up and jogging on the sidewalks. And you suddenly trip and fall into a puddle. Hands covered in mud all over. You come back home, pull out some papers and rub the mud off your hand, and you're good to go, right? Wrong. Madam Contest Chair, Madam Toastmaster, and respectable judges, and all of my dear friends, you are going to head straight to the bathroom to wash your hands thoroughly with soap and water. That's all logical. But why does paper win over water when it comes to clean your bum bum? Isn't that $1 million question? Oh wait, it's actually $30 billion question. Yes, a billion with a capital B. That's how big the global toilet paper industry is.
Okay, good. And I just took the opening, which is all we're doing. And so what I've done with that, and that's a very good beginning, I'm adding a few more details. And so this is where, okay. Imagine a wonderful morning following 7 days of torrential rain. This is the day you selected to begin your new running regime. As fate would have it, 3 blocks from your home, you fall flat on your face. Not discouraged, you walk back home to grab some paper towels to wipe off the mud. Why let a slight detour ruin your commitment to good health? As you look down, you realize it's going to take more than paper. What's a few more steps up to the bathroom? Now, I stop there because, now when you look at a script and listen to a speaker, there is a difference. It's always better when you hear the speaker, or usually when you hear the speaker deliver it. However, we use words to communicate, and when we do it well, the audience sees what we say. And much though I love the shaman commercials, I think they're adorable. Why do you think you have adorable cartoon bears? I think it's because we don't want to think of another person cleaning their bum bum. So although you did it very elegantly, I would leave that out. Now again, this is one opinion, and when I give people advice to change, I always suggest what you need to do is try it with different audiences and see how people feel. So I think it's a good opening, as I say, but build it up. You know, because a lot of people, oh, I fall down, that's an omen from God, I shouldn't be running. So that's why reinforce your commitment. Add in more detail. Torrential rain for 7 days. We know it really would be muddy. So it's not just a little mud, it's a lot of mud. And I think it is a good topic because that is an interesting statistic. So again, not necessarily in this speech, but that would be a great interesting statistic to engage an audience with, how big the toilet paper industry is. So with that, let me give you an applause because you did a great job. Wonderful. So that is razor-focused mini coaching. So as you review what you've heard, and you might want to think about painting scenes and really what pictures, and the obvious about reporting when you're 10, it's great to develop a relationship when you were young, but I think it becomes funnier, these planning a wedding, and then we're only 10. That was hysterical. So with that, now let me see, what did I do? My remote control. I have my bonus suggestion. My bonus suggestion is one. Hang on. Now my bonus suggestion is frozen here. Hang on. Technical difficulties, I think. Okay. Now let's see. My bonus suggestion from current. There we are. My bonus suggestion. Take all my presentation secrets. So of course, as you know, the 6 are 6 of the 7 steps in Deliver Unforgettable Presentations. Thank you for those of you who have it. No doubt you're on Darren's mailing list. But this really is a fun and easy read. $20 on Amazon. Go there. We don't take that's the best way to get them faster. If you're interested in more in-depth study, of course, Fripp virtual training, and you can go, if you go, you see, to Fripp VT, you can immediately take a free trial. If you're interested in joining, use Fripp as a coupon code to save 20%. So you can have a year of Fripp VT for $450. And we have ongoing user meetings where we do the mini coaching for our members. So but go in, take a trial and see. That is the best work I have ever done in my life. And then if you want no money but more information, go to fripp.com/handouts. And that is, we have special reports. You can sign up for my Tuesday mailings. And if you have a short, specific question, in the subject line, you would put District 101 questions. So I know it's from this event. Email me at pfripp@fripp.com. And this is what your free resources page looks like. You've got video clips, special reports. And with that, we have just a few minutes if you have any questions for me. And I will say before my concluding remarks, because you don't ever want to close your presentations. You don't want to close your presentation on questions, because what if somebody asks a negative question? You don't want to go out. You always want to go out on your own words. So see what you have for me.
Well, we have several questions, Patricia, that did come in. Some are a little bit off the topic itself. But the one thing that people are most asking about is your technology, more than anything else. If you don't mind sharing the technology.
No, I don't. Now, I am a mere mortal, and yes, I am very technical in my business, and my online learning is technical. However, if you're a normal person, you need somebody who can help you do it. So my setup, I could not do alone. So I have a program called vMix. And that gives me, if I want to, I don't have to, I can be plain, or if I want a frame. So for example, for my different clients, I have different frames to personalize when I do coaching for them. So on their recording of my coaching sessions, it's branded to their company. So that's what I can do. So that is vMix. Don't ask me how it works. You get Harold, who lives downstairs, to do it for you. Then I have an ATEM Mini Pro, which you might know what that is, that my laptop is where I get my visuals is in the Mini Pro. In other words, I am not sharing my screen, which makes me look a lot smaller, what this does, so we can be equal billing here, or I can be large. Now with the vMix and my Stream Deck, now I didn't know what a Stream Deck was. You probably know what a Stream Deck is, but everything is programmed in. So for example, if I wanted music before we came in, we were talking, I can put music. And that's where I move. So when I'm full screen, I'm on one button. When I have picture in picture, I have another. Or if I want to go to the video and I want to go full screen, it's another button. I also have programmed in here the music, or the clap, or the yay. Or if we ask for questions and there aren't any. Okay. So this is, then we have a shotgun microphone with lights, and although we rehearsed last night, Harold comes up in the morning, because as you know, there is different light in the morning than the evening, and he adjusts the lighting. So that might be more than you need. And remember, don't ask me more questions because I don't know. Ask Harold.
Is that a lot of that information, is that covered in your online learning
No,
training?
because when I created my online learning, some of this, like the vMix, hadn't even been invented.
Okay. Now, is that VEE mix or is it VI mix?
I think it's vMix.
Just V and mix.
V,
Well, thank you. I got
vMix.
them both wrong. So clearly. Now, from paying attention to everything you were saying, you talked about gestures. You also talked about the use of language to use and not use. One of the questions that came in also was, how do you feel about the use of humor, which wasn't fully touched on, but it was alluded to?
No. Myself, I believe, unless you are very funny. I have a lot of corporate clients say, I want to be funny. I say, do you make your friends laugh at dinner parties? No. Then you're not funny. In that case, be dramatic, be informing. You know, if you're not funny, don't try and be funny. Now, I do not, what I do is I tell stories that might be, you uncover the humor within the story. Right. So, for example, I think with our Kamal's speech, it was a lot funnier if you says, we're 10, if you think he's now grown up. So that's what is uncovering humor that's there by distracting us and not saying, well, we were right there then. So that's it. With I would say with Larry, when I'm in person, I get a lot of laughs when I say Larry. Well, but that's really what happened. And it's funny because when I spoke for Henry for his district conference, I told that story at the beginning, and a very good-looking red-headed district governor came up to me and said, you know, I dated Larry Mariottini after he got divorced. Do you know where he is? And I said, no, and it isn't like I haven't tried to find him. And she said, I'm going to track him down. And would you believe, the day we had the conversation, his kids put up a Facebook page for him and we all reconnected. So that was like the end of the story from Henry's conference. So any other questions?
Well, one about Larry Mariottini, for one, is I'd like to point out that I've heard many of your presentations, and Larry comes up in a lot of different contexts.
Really good point. I work with a lot of professional speakers. Some of my coaching clients charge $25,000 before I work with them. And you know, one of my friends, he had four different speeches that were well developed. This was a Hall of Fame keynote speaker. And I went to Memphis and I had him list each. So I have 4 flip charts and a list of all his stories with all his different speeches. And I showed him how most of the stories would fit in at least 1 or 2 of the other speeches and sound like they were designed for it. So it's a different point of view. So this is why it's worth turning a speech into a classic. Now, I don't tell Larry very often. However, just thinking about putting him in this speech, because it's a quick way to show little use of dialogue, when, where, who, what happens, and it's a perfect example for the Hollywood movie. Day in the life, something happens. So he was a good one. So even though I don't tell him, I've internalized it so much, I just run through it once or twice and it's as if I tell it every week.
Yeah. So one of the questions that also came up was about technical presentations and how to do it. You've talked about talking to scientists and Silicon Valley folks, how to do it so it sounds natural, non-patronizing, and still get across the suggestions and information. Do you have a suggestion for how to be more natural to that community?
Well, this is my bread and butter, is technology companies. You know, Nutanix, Rubrik, Palo Alto Networks, Zebra Technologies. These are my bread and butter. And what I do with them, they're all brilliant. I mean, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. And what I really help them with is their scripting. And it's how do they get into the presentation? How do they set it up? How do they speak in shorter sentences, one idea a sentence, make it more specific, you know, no stuff and things. And a lot of these brilliant people, they're a kind of sort ofs and stuffers. So it's just cleaning up the language. And what I also have found over the years is I am their encourager. I'm their encourager. They don't always have a fan. In fact, you know, a president of a very big company, they just got, I think, $200 million more, and they realized our president has to notch up his game. And I was giving him feedback, you know, that was superb, and this is why it was superb. And he said, but Patricia, you're my #1 fan. And it's you develop a relationship that, you know, people know I am on your side. And speech coaches get to work with executives because nobody else will tell them the truth. And I always, now, of course, you know how long I've been speaking. I always use age to my advantage when people say, you know, we're looking for a speech coach for our executive. And I don't take on a new client unless I get to talk to them to make sure we have a good rapport. Because it's not only the quality of the advice, It's the rapport that you have. Do you know this person is going to give you good advice? But I always say, because I'm seasoned, I'll be very respectful, but nobody's going to push me around. You know, because I give a pushback. No, you can't say that. No, you can't say that. So with that, to honor your time, let's go to my concluding remarks. So as you know, I joined Cable Car Toastmasters when I was 30. At age 32, I went to the National Speakers Association convention because a professional speaker was kind enough to hear me speak. And he said, Patricia, you must go to the NSA convention. And I'm a great believer, if someone you admire and wish to emulate gives you advice, you take it. And I went to that first convention thinking no one's going to want to talk to me. I only talked to Rotary clubs and hairdressers. And two situations appeared. One, because I started work at 15 as a hairstyling apprentice, I realized when my lease was up on my salon at 40, I would have had 25 years behind a hairstyling chair, and perhaps I would want to do something else. It might have been in the hairstyling industry because I loved it. However, I saw an image of perhaps I could be a professional speaker. Secondly, I was discovered by a big-time promoter who booked me to speak to 2,000 people on the same program with Dr. Robert Schuller, the Minister for Garden Grove. Then, in the year, I would say only in America and at NSA, well, and then in 2000, 60 Minutes came to the National Speakers Association convention. They videoed everything for 5 days. And people were standing in line to be interviewed. And you know, dozens and dozens of people. And I realized if I have any opportunity or any chance to be on 60 Minutes, I have to say something short, pithy, in a tweetable length phrase long before Twitter was invented. So I could tell you what I said, but perhaps you'd rather see what I said.
This former hairdresser, like others in the trade, is a born talker.
When I was a hairstylist, I worked on the outside of people's heads. Now, as a motivational speaker, I work on the insides of their heads. There's only half an inch difference.
So that line got me on 60 Minutes. That half inch has made me millions of dollars, but not all in the same year. So by now, I hope you know how to deliver electrifying. Get your audience on fire with your ideas, and that your presentations will be unforgettable. Thank you for the invitation. It's been fun to be with you.
Thank you, Patricia Fripp. And we also want to acknowledge Alexander Mate, who's in our audience. He was the second place winner in the World Championship of Public Speaking. He actually did it virtually, and it was a hybrid conference. There was in-person and virtual, and he was here to hear you speak as well today. And so we want to thank you for what a powerful presentation. Thank Alexandra for being here and for the skill he demonstrated in his presentation. There he is. Right there,
Yay!
all the way from Canada.
Oh, well, thank you so much, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be here in the shadow of the great Patricia Fripp. Look, I got one of her books. So
Oh yes,
Patricia,
wonderful. That's right.
I have studied so much, and I've heard you many times before. So it's a pleasure to be live in front of you. It's I'm getting nervous just being in front of you virtually.
Well, no doubt you're pally with some of my world champion friends.
Yes, that's been done.
Yeah. Good. Well,
Once
thank you,
again,
and
Patricia,
congratulations.
thank you for all you do for the Toastmaster community and the skill that you bring to us and share with us. Stay there, Alexandra. And remember, folks, pick up your book. I actually got this book as a result of Darren LaCroix and Mark Brown doing a review of the world champion speakers. And so they announced their book. So thank you again, Patricia. Thank you, everyone. We're now on break till 11:15. Is that correct, Jay?
Yes, till 11:15.
Okay, show your love to Patricia and to Alexandra, and thank you, everyone.